Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications. The following program is a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com to learn more about this and our other weekly storytelling programs, and become a patron today to show your support and get instant access to our extensive archive of downloadable ad-free tales of terror. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the show.
Good evening, listeners, and welcome to Season 8 of Horror Hill. I'm your host, Eric Peabody, and tonight we're going to be finishing up our cliffhanger from last week, closing out The Book of Agony by Dagan Billips. If you haven't heard that episode yet, I highly recommend you check it out before continuing here. For the rest of you, here's a quick recap of the story so far. Ben is a 12-year-old boy living in Tennessee, and he has a few problems. His best friend, Daniel, was found dead under mysterious circumstances. His parents are horrible to him, and, to top it all off, a strange book has appeared in Ben's room. Ben has been having violent dreams, watching his friend die over and over, and now Daniel himself has been visiting Ben, urging him to read the book and to do him some unnamed favor. Now that you're back up to speed, let's finish out the Book of Agony. This is a grisly one, folks. Disclaimer: Horror Hill is a horror anthology podcast bringing you scary stories from all corners of the internet and beyond. As such, certain stories include content that some listeners might find offensive. Listener discretion is advised. Who wants better, judgment-free sex? And who wants to start having it immediately? The best way to get started is to go to adamandeve.com right now. If we've learned anything about the technological sexual revolution, it's that there's something for everyone's kinks. If you're into something taboo, chances are dozens of others are as well. You're into accessories, right? Big ones, small ones, some as long as your arm. You get what I'm saying. Well, Adam and Eve has you covered there. Not only that, but Adam and Eve is offering 50% off just about any item, plus free shipping. Just go to adamandeve.com and select any one item. It could be an adventurous new toy or anything you desire. Just enter offer code HORRORHILL at checkout. That's Horror Hill, HORRORHILL, at adamandeve.com. This is an exclusive offer specific to this podcast, so be sure to use this code, HorrorHill, to get your discount plus 100% free shipping. Code HorrorHill. You're listening to the standard edition of this program. If you'd like to show your support and enjoy ad-free versions of this and hundreds of tales from our audio archives dating back to 2012, visit chillingtalesfordarknights.com and click Patrons in the upper menu to sign up today and get instant access. Did I mention they're ad-free? Thank you for your support. And now, from author Dagan Billips, I give you The Book of Agony, Part 2. It was Sunday morning, 6:30 according to Ben's clock. In half an hour, his parents would rouse him on their weekly excursion to church, where Ben would be lulled to sleep by the preacher, and Dave would pinch him to wake him up. And then, Dave would tell Ben on the way home about being godly, but Ben wouldn't listen. But at least his grandparents would come today, having stayed the night in the guest room. "Morning, sunshine," Charlie greeted 20 minutes later as he poured himself a large bowl of Count Chocula. "Morning. Sleep well?" Ben lied and nodded his head. He hoped his grandpa wouldn't notice the bags under his eyes. "That's good. Damn, I guess everyone else is sleeping in a little." He glanced briefly around the empty room. "I guess," Ben said. He poured himself a cereal bowl of his own and began to munch tiredly on the chocolatey chunks. "Oh yeah, meant to mention yesterday," Charlie announced a moment later. "Was talking to your cousin Mike the other day. Wanted to know how you were doing." Ben's stomach did a flip. "I told him the happenings. We ought to see him sometime when he's not busy, though. I don't know how the guy does it, but he's double majoring and working full-time. Think it's at Dingleberger, but he wants to go to NASA someday. He's got his bachelor's already. I think he's working on his master's right now. I need to remember what his majors are, though. Something to do with physics, that's all I know. Just watch out. He might start talking your head off about string theory and multiple universes. Interesting stuff, but I don't understand half of it." Ben nodded. "Yeah, I guess it'd be nice to see him." He'd never felt particularly close to his cousin, but for some reason, the man seemed to take a liking to Ben. The sermon that day was just as monotone as ever. The preacher never varied his delivery and rarely looked up from his podium, save when a toddler cried or someone stood at the wrong cue, which he would meet with a stern look of disapproval. His voice was dry and papery, and his skin even more so. It didn't help that Ben's parents refused to let him go with the youth groups because that wasn't a real church. Out of sheer boredom, Ben decided to count the number of times Dave pinched him. He achieved a high score of 16 pinches. His arm was sore by the end of the sermon. Afterward, Helen proposed that they take another trip to get ice cream, just the three of them. Ben eagerly agreed. "Hey, Ben," Helen said after a few minutes of silence. "Is everything okay at home?" The ice cream shop smelled sweet and milky, much better than the hot smell of dust and mothballs at the church. "Yes, ma'am," he lied. "You sure? You seem a bit gloomy, and I know how Dave can be. Got a stick up his ass about something all the time." Ben forced a light chuckle. He felt weak as a person. He knew he shouldn't give Daniel... no, the Nameless. what he wanted. He couldn't imagine what horrors would happen to lie within those pages, and he knew it would be all his fault when things worsened. Typical. Just typical. The worthless scum he was. Why couldn't he move on like Dave said he should? Why was he still like this? Why was he so fucking goddamn pathetic? He imagined his face in front of him. He wanted to strangle that throat, to gouge out those eyes, to really teach that little bitch a... "Ben," Charlie asked, "you okay?" He was shaking. Ben thought about lying again, but he couldn't lie to his grandparents anymore. The two people he loved most in the world. And he knew they wouldn't believe him. Hell, they might even call him crazy. But he couldn't lie to them. His heart was bruised enough as it was. "No, sir." Charlie blinked his eyes, clearly not expecting such a direct answer. "What is it, honey?" Helen asked. She placed a warm hand on Ben's knee. He tried to look for the words, but they didn't seem to want to show themselves. "I don't know. It's just... I don't think you'll believe me." Helen leaned towards him, an earnest gleam in her kind blue eyes. "Ben, you've already said enough for me to believe anything you say. We're here for you. You're our grandson, and we will do everything in our power to keep you happy and safe. Now, what is it?" Ben took a deep breath and forced the knot in his abdomen out of the way of his words. He told them everything. "So you made him wash his mouth with soap for an hour?" Helen exclaimed. "Well, he's gotta learn somehow," Dave replied irritably. "But liquid soap for an hour?" "He didn't learn from the bar soap last time, so liquid this time," Ben heard his mother respond, as though this were obvious. "Plus, he kept arguing with me," Dave argued. "I was gonna make it half an hour, but I had to make it an hour. Ben nearly pushed it to 2 hours. He should be thanking me, I tell you what." Charlie scoffed. "And if he'd accidentally swallowed it?" he asked incredulously. "Then it'd teach him his lesson even better," Penny retorted. It wasn't long past 8:30, but Ben had been sent to bed early after he fell asleep on the couch. Once in bed, though, he found it impossible to turn off his brain. Drawn by heated words, he now crouched at the top of the stairs as he listened to the argument in the living room below. "Dave," Helen sighed, "did we teach you nothing as a child?" "No, not much. Did a pretty piss-poor job, if you ask me." There was a pause, during which Helen hissed Charlie's name as if to keep him from retaliating. "Helen," Charlie muttered moodily, "we need to talk about the book." "Book?" Ben's father asked confusedly. "Charlie, what book are you talking about?" "David," he began with a sigh, "Ben told us about a book he found a little while ago. On his birthday, as a matter of fact. He says he told you about it?" There was a long pause. "I don't really know what you're talking about." "Really?" Helen scoffed. "You don't remember your son mentioning a book filled with ghastly horrors?" "Oh," Penny exclaimed. Ben knew that tone. She was acting. "Davy, he means the book Ben said was written in blood." "That?" he scoffed. "That stupid thing he made up? You don't honestly believe him, do you? And expect me to remember every little thing he says? He's a fucking kid, for Christ's sake. He just turned 11. 12, Helen interrupted. 12, whatever. It's nonsense. He's just trying to get attention, and I don't approve of that kind of behavior, nor should I reinforce it by giving it attention." "Nonsense?" Helen muttered in a dangerously quiet voice. "What's nonsense is staging an elaborate prank, as you call it." "Prank? What prank?" Penny blurted, a little too hastily. "We just ignored that whole book nonsense. What's this prank business?" Ben couldn't help but notice the mistake in her lie and smile a little to himself. "He says you lured him into the attic and scared him!" Charlie yelled. Ben wondered if he left out his father's reaction that night on purpose or not. "What?" laughed Dave disbelievingly. "You don't seriously buy that crap? I mean, Jesus, he's claiming to have a book written in blood with people cut up and shit. It sounds like a Clive Barker novel." "I," Helen stressed, "am willing to take Ben's word wholeheartedly on this." "You're joking. I mean, come on, the whole thing's just fucking preposterous. There is no book, Helen, and I'll be damned if I look for it either. And if Ben mentions that shit to me one more time, I swear I'll—" Ben heard something hard and hollow flop onto the coffee table. Briefly peeking down into the living room, he could see his parents gawking open-mouthed at the pageless cover of the Book of Agony. He had given it to his grandparents earlier to prove that he was telling the truth. "Ring any bells?" Helen prodded. Helen," Ben heard his mother say quietly, "where are the pages?" "Ben said he found them torn out yesterday morning." But, Dave blubbered. "Look," Charlie said, "Ben's experiences with this thing have disturbed him greatly." "Experiences? What experiences?" "He hasn't told you?" "No," Dave said curtly. "Nightmares every night, David. Every night he has to watch his friend get killed right before him." "Feels like he's always being watched, too," Charlie added. "And now he says there's something, I won't say what because you'll blow it off, is following him, talking to him, tormenting him, David. And this is your son we're talking about." "Well, no," Charlie stated. "Don't just sit there and dribble that horse shit out of that asshole mouth of yours when Ben's mental health is at stake here. And I'll ask you this once. Are you going to do anything about this? Something that preferably doesn't involve yelling at him?" Well, that answers my question, David. As a man who tries to live his life decently, I cannot do it. I cannot sit here and idly watch as you neglect and abuse my grandson, and I am unabashedly disappointed that you can't be fucking man enough to take care of your only son." Ben poked his head back down for a moment and was surprised to see that there were tears in his father's eyes, and that Penny was covering her own eyes with her hand. "Dave," Helen said, softly but sternly, "we think he has depression, maybe even PTSD. We want to get him into therapy and on medication." "Think about it, Dave. One of his best friends gets hit by a car, and suddenly Ben doesn't talk to his friends. He doesn't play, he doesn't laugh, and when he does, it's forced. He was crying to us when we went out to eat because you two weren't there when Ben needed you most. He tries to reach out to you, and you see it as an opportunity to play some sick joke on him, thinking it will somehow snap him out of this. Utterly disgusting behavior from both of you. Penny, I raised you better than that." Dave was silent, but Ben could hear his heavy, measured breaths. Penny gulped. "He may have some minor depression, sure. Maybe he can talk to his school counselor about it. But PTSD? No way. Ben didn't see it. He's a kid, too. They bounce back after things like this. It's not like he went to war. Penny, quit downplaying this for your own comfort, Helen scorned. He's got nightmares. He's hallucinating. We think he may have made this book during some state, which is why Ben needs psychiatric help immediately. Well, I'm not paying for that shit, Dave grumbled. Well, Charlie sighed. In that case, we think it's best if Ben comes and lives with us. You're showing complete and utter disregard for his emotional well-being to the point of emotional abuse and neglect. He's coming with us tonight. For good. Get out, Dave growled. He sounded dog-like. Ben had never heard this tone of voice before. Excuse me? Helen gasped. Get the fuck out. How dare you talk to us that way? I said, get the fuck out of my house, cunt! Dave screamed at the top of his lungs. The coffee table banged on his leg as he shot up from the couch. There was a heavy silence, after which Ben heard the shuffle of coats and the soft click of the front door. A moment later, Ben heard the engine of the Tacoma fire up and drive away. Benjamin Gordon Ross! Ben winced with anticipation as he stepped off the bus a little way down the street. Get your punk ass in here, now! He warily turned his gaze towards the house where the menacing figure of his father stood on the porch. Knowing better than to make the trip as slowly as possible, he hurried over to the yard as fear mounted within. When he approached the house, he slowed down slightly. His father stood in the doorway, his knuckles white against the wall and his eyes blazing with insane fury, the likes of which Ben had never seen before. He glanced down and thought that he must be wrong, but there appeared to be blood on his shoes. Upstairs, bedroom, now! He spat as he yanked Ben by the arm and shoved him towards the stairs. At the top of them, standing to the left of them and by his bedroom door, was his mother's iresome stare. He paused, but Dave kicked his backpack hard, sending him face first into the corner of the stair. Ow! He cried. Shut up! Dave screamed. His voice was so distorted by rage that it was almost unrecognizable. Ben picked himself up, his body hot and stinging with sweat underneath his heavy winter coat. Inside! Penny snarled. Ben grasped the bedroom door handle. Open it! Dave barked. With a grimace, Ben pushed open the door, and he froze. His bedroom was as close to hell as he could imagine. Nailed to the walls, ceiling, and floor were the missing pages the Nameless had promised to bring him. But this was not what made Ben's breath catch in his throat. Blood was splashed like grim work all over the room, and in the center of it was where the most blood was. And it was where the intestines were also piled up like fetid dog shit. An intestine led up from the floor and connected to Daniel Mortley's naked corpse, suspended from the ceiling fan by a noose, jerking grossly from the fan's rhythmic pulse. His eyes were gouged, and dried blood caked the rims of his eyes, nose, and mouth. His throat had been slit, and blood dribbled all the way down to where his chest had been ripped open and down to his crotch. Insides spilled out onto the floor, blood still dripping with a quiet splat, splat against Daniel's disembodied lungs. And Ben screamed. Don't you dare fucking scream, you little psycho! His father roared from behind. Do you see what you did? Do you see what you did? Ben wanted to turn around, but he couldn't. His eyes were locked upon the mutilated body of the closest friend he'd ever had that now hung in his bedroom. Answer me! Ben turned around to face the other horror in the room. "What the fuck did you do to that dog?" "Dog?" he responded meekly. "Don't you fucking play with me! Don't you dare fucking play with me!" His father paused, taking a deep breath. "All right, fine. It's pretty fucking clear what this is. You don't want to live here anymore? Fine. You'd rather live with your precious grandparents than your own parents? Fine. You want to play a little fucking serial killer in the making? Fucking fine. But don't bring this shit into my fucking house!" His father grabbed him by the shoulders, spun him around, and grabbed him by his backpack, throwing him face first into the wall next to the hole Ben had made himself. "David!" Penny shrieked, though it sounded distant to Ben. "You little bitch! What in the holy fucking hell is wrong with you, huh?" His father thundered deafeningly as he advanced menacingly. "Do you think this is funny? This is some sick fucking joke?" Dad! Ben stammered, but David picked him up and came within an inch of his face, screaming. "You're gonna take your fucking medicine!" He slammed Ben's head into the floor, ripping off his backpack simultaneously. "Mommy!" he screamed. "David, stop! David!" Penny rushed in and tried to push his father off of him, but he only let go of Ben and decked her in the face. "You bitch!" Dave turned around and threw Ben into the dresser. The lamp fell and bashed into his skull. He tried to crawl away, but his father kicked him back into the dresser. "Whose dog is that, Ben? Whose dog is that?" Ben didn't understand what he meant. All he knew was that his friend's corpse was in the middle of the room, and soon his own corpse would be with it. Penny charged back into the room with a bat and swung it into his father's ribs. He screamed, but said nothing as he grabbed it from her and swung it into her head, her body going limp and falling into the pile of intestines. He then threw the bat down, grabbed the lamp, and beat Ben in the face with it repeatedly, the lampshade eventually coming off and the light bulb breaking over his face, blood streaming into Ben's eyes. "Daddy! Daddy, please!" David said nothing as he picked Ben up and threw him into the closet, where Ben's body slumped to the ground. Through the blood, sweat, and tears, Ben saw it. He saw Daniel's corpse standing in the corner, smiling at him. From the ceiling hung the corpse of a brindle pit bull, mutilated in the exact same way. It was him, Dad," Ben gasped, trying to point at the Nameless, but he was not heard. In the corner, the Nameless smiled. An owl cried outside the window. Chapter 6. A little over 2 months had passed since Ben had been sent to the emergency room. He still had scars on his face and body, but his recovery had been remarkably quick, astonishing his doctors. Miraculously, Dave hadn't managed to break any bones seriously. It had only been a few moments that the bat had knocked out Penny, and while Dave's merciless beating occupied him, she stumbled her way down the stairs to the phone and called the police, who arrived within minutes and arrested Dave, an image Ben wouldn't be soon to forget. Immediately after getting his father out of the way, the paramedics rushed both Penny and her son to the hospital. Luckily, Ben only had a concussion and some minor fractures and dislocations. Penny was terrified of possible brain damage, but there were no signs of any. While there, his legal custody was handed over to his grandparents, who were more than willing to take him in. Their house was cozy, nestled on the outskirts of Maysburg amidst a rather large swath of forest in the country. It was here that Ben finally felt genuinely loved by somebody, and though he remained largely friendless when he started going to Maysburg Middle, he felt content. Somehow, despite the popular kids being ruthless bullying machines, he flew under their radar. He was in therapy now, too, and on medication. He'd been diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and PTSD, just like his grandparents had suspected. He was the happiest he had ever been. "Ben, your mother called today," Charlie told him one Wednesday afternoon in early February. "She said she wants to talk to you about something." "About what?" he asked. Charlie shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know. She wouldn't tell me, just that she wants to see you tomorrow. I told her I'd ask you about it." Ben frowned. There was a lot he was still resentful about towards his mother. The idea of her coming here, to his sanctuary, of a piece of that hell, disturbed him. Charlie sighed. "I get it, Ben. I really do. But she's your mother. She might not be the best mother in the world, but she does care about you. And it sounded to me today like she's been thinking a lot. And it would be here, where you'd be safe. And David wouldn't be here to keep everyone down." Ben nodded his head heavily. "Okay, I guess I'm okay with it. Do you know if Dad's going to prison yet?" "Can't say I do, son," he said. "He won't talk to me. Your mother's the only one who knows right now. And I'm sorry, Ben." "Why are you sorry?" he asked. Because I feel like it's partly my fault." "How is it your fault?" "Well, I did raise her. And sure, I wasn't the perfect parent. I could have been more involved in her life, but I don't know what I did for her to turn out this way. I'm sorry." "It's not your fault. You didn't make her marry David and let him beat Mom and me up." Charlie smiled. "Yeah. You know what, Ben? You're a good kid. Best kid there is. It's just unfortunate that you haven't had the life you deserve. I hope Helen and I can turn things around for you and give you a good home." "Yeah," Ben said, not sure what to say. "Ah, hell," he cried, throwing his arms up playfully. "What is it?" Charlie gave him a look of frustration, but Ben knew immediately that he was messing with him. "I've got to start saving to put you in college." "Already?" "Shit, college is expensive, Ben, and it's only getting more expensive every year." Ben laughed, and for the rest of that afternoon, Charlie took him out back to shoot targets with his revolver, something they hadn't done in years. The next day dragged on. Ben both looked forward to and dreaded Penny's visit that afternoon. He wanted things to be okay with her, but he didn't want things to return to how they were. When he came home from school, his grandparents acted as though nothing was out of the ordinary, but Ben could see a certain hesitation in their eyes. At last, the sound of tires rubbing over gravel outside, and soon to follow was a timid knock upon the front door. "Well, guess that's her," Charlie said as he stood up and went over. "Hey," Penny muttered, obscured by Ben's grandfather. "Hey." There was a moment's silence as the frigid air from outside crept in. "May I come in?" "Yeah, Ben's right over there." He gestured as he stepped away from the door. She smiled at Ben and took off her black gloves. "Hi, sweetie. How are you?" "I'm okay," he returned. He forced a polite smile. "That's good. How are you, Helen?" "All right," she answered curtly. She didn't look up from her book. "You want a drink or anything?" Charlie asked after closing the door. We've got water, coffee, Pepsi, milk. Might still have some almond milk, too. A coffee would be nice, Penny smiled. One coffee coming up. You want a Pepsi, Ben? Yes, sir. He set down the book they'd been reading in class. Still reading just as much as ever, huh? She asked as she slowly took a seat on one of the extra chairs. Yes, ma'am. What book is that? Lord of the Flies. Oh, that's a good one. Do you like it? Pretty good. Gotta write a paper, though. Oh, you reading it for school? Mm-hmm. Charlie came back into the living room and said, Hey, if you want some privacy, you can use Ben's room if you want. Oh, and, how do you like your coffee? That'd be great, Charlie. And black is fine. All right. Ben's in your old room. Oh, and here's your Pepsi. Coffee will be ready in a few minutes. Ben got up and led her to his room, which was a little smaller than his old room, but the brown walls and view of the trees behind the house made it feel more homely. There was an old clock on the wall that ticked softly. It helped him sleep at night. I like the room, she said as she closed the door behind them. Do you like it? Ben nodded his head and sat down on his bed. Penny pulled up an old antique dining chair from the corner that Ben liked to read in so that she could face him. They stared at each other, awkwardly, for a minute or so. Penny's gray eyes scanned the room sporadically. She coughed and pulled back her auburn hair. So, how's school going? It's good. Grades okay? Yeah, A's for the most part. She smiled. You're a smart kid. There was a knock on the door, and Charlie eased in with a steaming mug of coffee. Thanks. Everything okay? Need anything? No, but thank you, Penny answered. Charlie gave a dry thumbs up and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. Penny took a brief sip and recoiled from the heat. Ooh, that's hot. So, I'm sure you're wondering why I wanted to talk to you, and I know you probably have a lot of questions about your dad. Is he going to prison? Ben asked quickly. She blinked her eyes and set down the mug. It'll be another 6 months before his hearing, but probably. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't. Ben nodded, looked down at his shoes, and tried to hide his smirk. She leaned over and tried to put her hand on his leg, but he recoiled involuntarily, and she retracted her hand. Ben wished he hadn't done so. It felt nice, the brief moment it had been there. I know it's hard, Ben. Believe me, it's hard on me too. I mean, I've known him for years, since high school. I didn't particularly appreciate having him arrested, but he was out of control. He could have killed you, could have killed both of us. Ben nodded his head, his eyes still fixated on his shoes, observing every fiber and splash of mud. And now I've lost my son, too. But I guess it's best for you here. I can't afford to pay for both of us. Besides, there's a lot of heaviness there. No place to be happy. But I do want you to know, Ben, that I love you. He looked up and saw his mother wipe tears from her eyes. Penny gripped her purse tightly in her lap and shivered in her black coat. Ben looked back down uncomfortably. I've been thinking a lot since everything happened, and I want to say that I'm sorry, sweetie. I've always loved you more than anything in the world, but I never knew I never showed it. I should have been there for you. It's okay, Ben whispered, looking back up, this time keeping his eyes on hers. No, she said with a shake of her head. No, it's not okay. I should have been there, and I was never there, not even when your friend died. It was just, I didn't want to admit that anything was wrong. I wanted to have the perfect family, to have the perfect husband, to be the perfect wife and the perfect mother. I didn't know what it meant, what the perfect husband was, or what the perfect mother was either. The only thing that mattered to me was that it looked like we had perfect lives. I never wanted to think about the reality. I should have made him leave a long time ago. He wasn't fit to be a father or a husband. He never was. If he were, he never would have done the things he did. He never would have hit you or treated you the way he did. But I let it happen. I went along, afraid of what would happen if I didn't. And sometimes I believed he was right. Like when he made you eat that bologna, or when we, tricked you in the attic. Did Dad hit you when I wasn't around? Ben asked. The question had been in his mind ever since she'd sported the bruise on her cheek the morning after they lured him into the attic, but he never had the courage to ask. She took in a sharp breath. She reached for her mug delicately and raised it to her lips. Yes, he did, Ben. A fury rose within Ben that he had never felt before, a sort of protective rage. I tried to keep it from you. I didn't want you to worry. That's why I would only argue with him in the bedroom, and usually he did a good job of not leaving marks. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, he said. It wasn't your fault. She stared him in the eyes with a look that all at once conveyed pride, joy, and was it fear? You've always been so mature, she murmured. She took a seat beside him, and Ben hugged her tightly. He felt her tears on his neck, but he had none to offer. He wasn't quite sure how he was supposed to feel. A few minutes later, he felt her head lift away, and he looked up to see Charlie standing in the doorway. Hey, just wanted to say we're about to have dinner if you want. Ben's mother wiped her eyes and checked her flip phone. I wish I could, but I have to get going, she said. I had to pick up another job to keep up with the bills and need to be there at 9. All right. If you ever want to stop by, feel free. You used to live here, after all. Thank you. I'll try to come back soon. Maybe next week? Any day. Ben gets home around 4, and Helen and I are both home by 3. All right. Well, Ben, I'll come back as soon as possible. Is that okay with you? He nodded his head, his eyes heavy. They all got up, and Ben walked with her to the car. Call me, okay? Yeah. She smiled and kissed him on the head. Ben watched from the driveway as she drove away. As he was putting the Lord of the Flies back into his bag for the next day before bed, he noticed that there seemed to be an extra book in there. Confused, he picked it up and froze. His limbs prickled with dread. It was the Book of Agony. He remembered what the Nameless had told him that dark night in December, how the Nameless had told him to read it a second time, standing amidst the burnt ashes of what was now his bedroom. Hands trembling, he slowly sifted through the sewn-together pages. His fingers turned the pages faster as he went along, desperate to put it away again. And, to his twisted relief, nothing seemed to have changed other than the pages were reattached. That is, until he reached the last page. The ink was bright red and reeked of pennies. The painting was of Ben, chained to a wall, trapped behind bars. He was staring at 2 corpses on the other side. Chapter 7. Ben's alarm clock read 1:58 a.m. With a sigh, he slid out of his bedsheets and changed back into his day clothes. He grabbed the Book of Agony, the leather hot against his skin, and eased his way to the closed door of his grandparents' bedroom without a sound. He put his ear against the crack and listened to their snores. The coast was clear. He crept through the back door, cringing at the loud creak of the wood. Zipping up his coat, he trudged through the light snow and went to the shed. There, he grabbed a red canister of gasoline. Checking his pockets, he realized he had forgotten the lighter. "Shit," he whispered to himself. His breath hung in the air like a pale ghost. There was a dirty flashlight on a counter that ran along the far wall of the shed. The amber light flicked to life as he flipped the switch. To his fortune, he found a dusty box of matches in the back. After he turned the light off and silently closed the door, Ben continued deeper into the woods. The frigid silence bit at his nerves. The trees thickened as he went along in the lonely February night, their bony branches tangling themselves around him. He couldn't decide if they looked like they were trying to keep him away or trying to strangle him. After 10 minutes or so, Ben came across a sudden clearing. It was the one. He'd come across it before during the day while exploring. The sky above was bright and clear, but the shadows were dark and preyed on Ben's imagination. Failing to suppress a shudder that had little to do with the cold, Ben gritted his teeth, shoved past the trees, and stomped his way into the center of the clearing, determined to put this all to an end. He threw the book onto the frozen earth as hard as he could and ignored the cry of an owl nearby. He set down the matches and raised the gas can. He was about to drown the book in the pungent liquid, but he heard movement behind him, and he froze. After he heard nothing else, he told himself that it must have been a deer and tilted the nozzle. Snap! He whirled wildly on the spot. His eyes searched frantically for the source, and from behind, he heard the owl cry again. For some reason, it sounded as though it was saying his name. It was hard to discern anything in the darkness, but he thought he saw a shadow moving in the bushes. He turned back to the book as the owl screeched violently overhead. His breath scraped against the air like rusty nails. More than panicked, he fumbled around with the matches, trying to bring the dead sticks back to life. It wasn't easy, but he eventually got one to stay ablaze. The moment the match struck the book, Ben was sent flying into the air, his body spinning violently until it slammed into the hard trunk of a tree. He did a double take. Dazed, Ben tried to focus his attention past the explosion of pain that ricocheted through his body and onto the fire in the clearing. Ben had successfully set the book on fire, but that was all that could be said for his endeavors. For a while, a great fire blazed in the center of the clearing. Everything about it was completely wrong. The flames rose high into the air, a blazing black tower of the night. The smoke it emitted was thick and noxious. It raced outward past him and into the trees. The smoke burned his eyes and nose, his mouth too. All around the flames, the light seemed to glare with a pale hue, sucking the color out of the forest around him. He noticed, to his horror, that the flames were quickly spreading outwards on a rampage through the clearing and towards the trees, towards him. He tried to stand, but a blast of hot smoke shot at his face. He closed his eyes, but when he opened them again, he found that the tree he'd been pinned against was now too on fire. A lean, shadowy figure emerged from the midst of the flames, hunched over and shimmering like a mirage. It made a noise that made Ben's hairs stand on end and began to charge at him, long, sharp fingers extended towards him. It wrapped its claws around Ben's head and forced him to stare into its glowing white eyes. Ben woke with a gasp for breath and struggled in his sheets. It took him a moment to realize he was no longer trapped in the burning clearing and that he was safe in his room. The yellow morning sunlight peeked through the frosted windows. He sighed deeply to ease his nerves and wrangled himself from his cocoon. The chilly air bit at his sweat-soaked skin, and Ben hurried to his closet to change from his pajamas. Wait, pajamas? But hadn't he changed back into his clothes the night before? The dream memories washed back over him, and he checked over his body. He saw no burns, cuts, or scrapes. Surely it hadn't been a dream. It seemed more real than any nightmare he'd had with the Nameless. It was branded into his skull. He laughed at the situation and realized it must have been a dream. But his relief was short-lived, because it was then that he realized that if it had been a dream, horrible as it was, then the book still survived, lurking in the shadows in wait for the right time for him to stumble across it. But had the fire truly destroyed it? No, of course it didn't, he thought to himself, because it was just a dream. But where was it now? He nervously glanced around the cozy bedroom, scared he might see it lying on his bed. Or was it possible that he'd somehow dreamt of finding the book, too? No, he'd been haunted by that wretched thing and the Nameless for months. No, there was no way he dreamt all that. But perhaps he hadn't dreamt it. Maybe he'd imagined the whole thing, a delusion brought on by grief. The thought that he was crazy made Ben's heart skip a beat, though soon a calm seemed to wash over his body. He almost laughed with his newfound relief, because if it hadn't been real, then there was nothing to be afraid of. Yet, there was an odd, empty feeling in his chest, as though a butcher's knife had carved it out. He felt a peculiar sense of loss that had nothing to do with anything he had yet experienced. It was as though a piece of me died. He shook his head. "Stop it," he commanded himself. "Just stop it. You're being crazy." He giggled at this thought. Who knew what kind of stories he might come up with next? He embraced this newfound identity, Ben the crazy kid. Giggling uncontrollably, he changed his clothes and went into the bathroom. As he grabbed his toothbrush, he froze, looking in the mirror. There were leaves in his hair. "Golly gee," he mused lightly, waving his initial fright away. "Those twigs must have been in there all day yesterday. Why didn't anyone tell me?" Ben ripped the twigs from his gnarled hair, wincing. That Friday was wonderful. He was talkative to just about everyone he sat next to in class, joking and goofing around as though he didn't have a care in the world. And why shouldn't he? He lived in a home that actually felt like a home, and he'd come to realize that the nightmare he'd suffered the past few months was merely a grim fantasy. But deep down, he knew that the grim fantasy was a reality. He knew that he was just too terrified of the reality to face it head on. And it was because of this that he finally let slip a glaring hole in his denial that afternoon when he came home. If the whole thing had been an invention of his mind, then how had he been able to show his grandparents the book? Or, for that matter, how could he explain the dog that had been strung up in his bedroom, causing his father to inflict the injuries that still made his movements stiff? No. What was he talking about? He'd clearly imagined giving the Book of Agony to his grandparents, and obviously no dog had been hanging in his bedroom. His dad probably didn't even beat him. Ben probably imagined that, too. Ben must have done something else to upset his father. He just had to figure out what it was. Reaffirmed in his insanity, Ben easily drifted off to sleep that night. No! 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 Please take me back! I don't want to be here anymore! Ben wailed. Be quiet, you, the Nameless snarled, and get a move on. The Nameless kicked Ben smartly in the back of the head and sent him face first into the rough snow. The rocks and twigs scraped against his raw face. Though Ben's memory of what had transpired after the shadowy figure charged at him was foggy, he'd suddenly found himself lying in the snow of the clearing. Both of his legs were broken, with the Nameless scowling from above. You fucked up, kid, he'd said. You fucked up. The Nameless had then picked Ben up and threw him into the snow, ordering him to crawl. Ben didn't dare cry. Not once that whole day. He was forced to crawl on broken legs. And especially not now, even though the night air was a bit harder than ever. Why? Ben whimpered. Because you're slow as shit, you worthless scum. No, Ben corrected. Why are you doing all of this to me? The Nameless leaned down and grabbed Ben by the hair and growled into his face, breath drenched in iron. Because I fucking can. Now move! Ben didn't argue, but instead resigned himself to keep crawling at his snail's pace. The night grew darker. Ben, the Nameless said quietly after what must have been hours, if you want this to end, then you must come to us. Start by going to the clearing. But we just came from there, Ben gasped. He didn't know how much more of this he could take. I'm not talking to you, the Nameless spat. What? The Nameless stared into Ben's eyes with a cold glare and said, Open your eyes, Ben, and wake up. Ben awoke and turned to his alarm clock. It read that it was 8. Helen, honey, I think we're out of Count Chocula, he heard his granddad rumble from the kitchen. Hey, Ben, Charlie said from the breakfast table when Ben came into the kitchen a few minutes later. His voice was groggy and his eyes were puffy. How'd you sleep? All right, I guess, he lied. He didn't like lying to him, but he didn't know how he could possibly tell his grandparents what had happened. He was afraid it would be too bizarre for even them to believe. Good, Charlie mumbled as he munched noisily on a piece of toast. Ben peered into the cereal cabinet for a moment without really looking. You okay? Helen asked. Ben jerked from his trance. Oh, yeah, he said. You sure? Ben didn't respond immediately, but instead thought carefully about his words. Do you remember that book I showed you a couple months ago? He asked tentatively. The Book of Agony? Yeah. His stomach plummeted, distraught by this blazing hole burned in his delusion. How could she remember it if it weren't real? Why, yes, I do, Ben. Why do you ask? Just wondering, he muttered. They tried to press him for more information, but his tongue was tied. Eventually, he retired to his room and closed the door quickly behind him. It was just a dream, he thought as he paced around his room. Just a dream, just a dream, just a dream. It was just... A clump of snow fell from above and smacked him in the head. What the hell am I doing? He asked himself. I'm not going to find anything. I should stop and turn around. But his feet wouldn't listen. They plowed stubbornly through the slushy snow. He should have been there by now, but he tried not to think about it. It was stupid. Pointless. just a stupid dream. Yet, here he was, blundering around in the woods, getting his feet wet. And even though it was February, he was sweating profusely underneath his coat. The sun had decided to blaze on like it was May, but Ben didn't feel like carrying his coat, so he endured the notoriously inconsistent Tennessee weather. This is stupid. This is stupid. This is so fucking... He stopped in his tracks. He hadn't quite reached the clearing, but he knew he was close because every tree was burnt to a crisp. The trees towered over him and stretched out their long black fingers towards the clearing ahead. He crept forward until he was finally behind the bony bushes surrounding the clearing. He spied a dark stain in the center. Warily, he stalked forward with the apprehension of a cat. His head felt light, and his blood pumped heavily through his veins like a war drum. Alas, atop the stain was the black, gooey remains of the plastic gas can, with the ashes of the matchbook next to it. But completely untouched, in the center of the stain on the ground, was that wretched fiend, the stalker of his nightmares, the Book of Agony.
What do you want?
Ben shrieked to the trees around him. He picked up the book and hurled it at the nearest one.
I never did anything to you!
Ben stomped his foot into the melted gas can, smooshing the solidified remains into an indistinguishable pulp. He went over to where he'd thrown the book and punched the tree as hard as possible. He recoiled from the pain and cradled his bloody fist. He'd never felt rage like this. The closest he'd come was when he beat up that kid on the bus, but that didn't even closely compare to this. He wanted to break. He wanted to tear. He wanted to kill.
You stupid piece of fucking shit!
He screamed, ripping out a page with each word.
How's your stupid book now, asshole?
Ben yelled to the air around him. He kicked the book again, and pages flew around him in a blizzard of torment. He put his fists to the trees repeatedly, at first ignoring the pain, but then letting it fuel his rage. It was all he knew to do. But eventually, he grew tired and gave the book one last kick before storming back to his grandparents' house. How could he have been so fucking stupid? God, to think he was so pathetic as to actually think that none of it had been real. He punched himself in the jaw a few times, hot tears prickling his eyes. The blood from his knuckles stained his face. What was wrong with him? Jesus fucking Christ, what a goddamn scum-sucking piece of shit! There was nothing he could do. Absolutely nothing. Because he was too weak, too pathetic, too stupid to figure it out. He could only roll over and expose his belly to the grisly claws of the Nameless like an obedient dog. Because that's all he was. A fucking dog. He fell to his knees and sobbed, though he had no tears. This was it. This was what his life had become. Ben was scared. He'd been reduced to nothing. This episode of Horror Hill comes to you from sponsors Adam and Eve. Bring more pleasure and satisfaction into your bedroom with thousands of products to choose from. Edible underwear, scented lubricant, rubber fists, sexy costumes, adult board games, Peter pumps, things to make you finish faster, or things to make you finish slower. They've got it all. And with the offer exclusive to this podcast only, what do you have to lose? Don't wait. Better sex is just a click away. Small town with nosy neighbors? Adam and Eve has your back there too. Adam and Eve wants to make your life easy. They offer discreet shipping as your privacy is a priority. Plus 100% free shipping on your entire order. Doesn't matter how much you spend or what you buy. All will be packaged and sent discreetly for free. So you can order your clamps, stamps, straps, and the like with confidence. And remember, Adam and Eve is offering 50% off just about any item, plus free shipping. Bring more pleasure and satisfaction into your bedroom with thousands of products to choose from. Just go to adamandeve.com and select any one item. It could be an adventurous new toy or anything you desire. And just enter offer code HORRORHILL at checkout. That's HORRORHILL, HORRORHILL at adamandeve.com. This exclusive offer is specific to this podcast, so be sure to use this code HORRORHILL to get your discount plus 100% free shipping. All Ben knew was that he was somewhere dark, chained to a wall. The skin of his wrists prickled beneath the tight choke of rusted shackles. He could see nothing. The broken bones in his legs felt like they might break even more, but the damp, stony floor helped numb the pain. He had no idea how he got there. All he knew was that somewhere along the way, in that expanse of wintry black woods, he'd passed out from a culmination of pain, exhaustion, hunger, and thirst. And now, here he was, alone. "Well now, this isn't right, is it?" A voice chimed from the darkness. "Let's get some light in here." A faint orange light appeared as a figure slid open a slat in a window beyond Ben's reach. Directly across from him was a dark wooden door. Bars blocked them from the outside world, letting in just enough light to illuminate the cold dungeon he seemed to be in. Every inch of the cell was covered in dirt, mud, mold, and grime. And in front of Ben, there were bars dividing the room, rusted green and orange. Ben noticed that blood also seemed to be splashed haphazardly across the room. "Come now, old buddy. Don't just lie there all crumpled up in a heap." The Nameless stepped from the shadows, Daniel's features distorted into a terrifying shape. Ben asked the first question that came to his mind. "What are you?" The Nameless laughed, a sound his ears were unprepared for, and he recoiled from the monster before him. "You know," he said, "I've been following you around for a while now." He cast his eyes to the ceiling as if lost in thought. "Oh, how well I've come to know you, Ben. We're like old friends, you and me. I'd say I know you better than you do." Ben gritted his teeth. "Perhaps you still think I'm the ghost of your old pal Daniel Mortley, eh? Daniel was never cruel like you are." The Nameless laughed. "Well, I would know. You see, I got to know him a bit myself before I came to you. He was a good kid. I can see why you two were so close. It's a shame I had to kill him." "You what?" "Oh yes, I most certainly did. It was no accident like everyone in that stupid town thinks. No, my fun with him was over. I needed to move on. And wouldn't it be my luck that you, my good sir, were such a bright candidate?" The Nameless sighed and grabbed the bars. He slumped his face against them. "I like you, Ben. You've got a lot of sand. Well, maybe like wouldn't be the right word. I fucking hate your guts. But I respect you. It's taken me a long time to wear you down." Is Daniel here too? Ben asked, afraid of what he might hear. Oh my, yes. There are many people here. Many sad little souls like you. But you'll never get to see them. No, not ever. Never, ever, ever. Alone. Forever. He eased himself up, hands in his pockets. I suppose you'd also like to know why I'm doing this? Ben nodded. Well, I can grant you that. I'm feeling generous at the moment. Though I don't like what you did to my friend, the book. I always found it amusing that if people think something's cursed, an easy fix is to burn the damn thing. No, the book can't be destroyed like that. Takes a lot more. No, all you'll do is piss it off, which you did. And then it cuts right to the chase and ends my fun, because that's why I do it, Ben. Because watching people suffer is the greatest joy I can ever experience. I could easily find somebody and immediately get what I needed from them. But that kind of life sounds miserable. I like to grind people down to their cores. It's amazing what people can do if you push them hard enough. And that's all you are to me, Ben. A toy. I'm like a cat. Psst. Ben jumped, which caused the Nameless to grin maliciously. Now, to what I need from you. The Nameless straightened and resumed in a sudden business-like tone. Anyways, chit-chat aside, Ben, let's cut to the chase. I need you to do something for me. Just one small little favor. Hell, if you do it, I might even let you go. Let you free and leave you to do whatever you please with the rest of your life. What is it? Ben asked, his heart racing. He had come to expect nothing but the worst. Well, you see, because you decided to try and burn my book, I can't really have much fun with you anymore. But I'm still hungry. Hungry for more. Hungry for blood. What? Benjamin Ross, if you want to walk out a free man and not stay here for all of conceivable eternity, then you must do me this one last favor. You have to kill your grandparents. Chapter 7. No! Ben, what is it? For a moment, Ben still thought he was in the dungeon, trapped with the Nameless. But then he felt his grandmother's warm, comforting embrace rocking him gently. You okay? Charlie asked from the doorway, still in his boxers. Can't breathe, he cried, gasping for air. His lungs seemed to constrict within him. Helen pulled away and put her hand on his head, calmly stroking his hair. Shh. It's all right. We're right here. Nothing can hurt you. Charlie sat at the foot of the bed and put a reassuring hand on Ben's thigh. You're fine. It was just a dream, right? Deep breaths, Ben. Deep breaths. Ben began to calm down, following his grandfather's instructions, and focused his attention on the clock's tick. Yeah, he choked. Just a dream. It's all right, Helen soothed. It's all right, see? You're home. You're home, where you're safe. Nothing but us. We'll protect you. Ben's breath slowed, as did his heart. He took in his surroundings, the dim glow of the moon through the blinds, the red glow of his alarm clock, the two comforting figures beside him. I'm home, he told himself. You better? Helen asked after a moment. Yeah, She looked him in the eyes, concern written all over her face. "Do you need to sleep in our room tonight? It's okay if you do." "No," he said. "No, I'll be fine." "You sure, Ben?" Charlie urged. "Nobody'll think the less of you." "I'm sure." "Okay, sweetie. We'll be right in our room down the hall if you need us, okay?" "Okay." "All right. Well, good night." "Good night. We love you." "I love you too." "Good night, Ben." "Good night, Grandpa." Charlie smiled at him as he exited the room, leaving the door cracked. "No," Ben thought. "I won't do it. I can't do it. I'd rather die." "So that's the final verdict, huh?" the Nameless demanded. He stood inside the bars, towering over him. Ben hawked a loogie on his shoes and said nothing. The Nameless raised a foot and observed the wad of spit. He leaned down and put his face level with Ben. "Now, I really think you should think about your decision before things get ugly." Ben hawked another loogie, right in the bastard's eye. "I take that as a no. Very well. You've stated your position quite clearly. Now, I'll state mine." He pulled out a long, needle-like knife with sharp prongs and held it in front of Ben's eye. "You know what they say? An eye for an eye." He jabbed the object through Ben's eye, immeasurable pain blasting through his skull. "Hold still, or else I'll slip." Ben could hear muscle rip behind his screams of pain as his right eye was pulled away from his skull, blood, muscles, and nerves dangling out of the empty socket. "Oh, you think that was bad, huh? Well, I've got news for you, buddy. There's a lot more where that came from. Like I said, you've got sand, but you might have too much sand." Ben could feel the device being stabbed into him again, flesh tearing down his arm.
"Please!"
he screamed.
"Make it stop!"
"Then rethink your position, Ben," the Nameless snarled as he ripped open Ben's right forearm.
"No! Please, anything else!"
"Then maybe I ought to make you listen." The knife swiftly sliced off Ben's left ear, and the Nameless held it before him. "You can't pass out from the pain here. I can go on for eternity like this. Now, what do you say? You gonna listen from here on out?" "Okay," Ben gasped as he hung his head in resignation. "Okay, what?"
"Okay, I'll do it. I'll do what you say. I want the pain to stop."
"Very well. You can wake up now. You'll know what to do." Ben awoke for the second time that night with tears stained down his face and his sheets wrapped like a mummy. He'd never felt so much physical relief before. No broken bones could compare. The thought of what might happen if he didn't pull through was more than Ben could comprehend. It was enough to drive him mad. It had to be now. He unraveled himself from the sheets and put on his jeans, boots, coat, hat, and gloves. Outside, he could hear the wind howl furiously, and snow swirled past the windows. He picked up his bag and emptied its contents onto the floor, stuffing a few extra clothes into it and a book or two. He snuck to the bathroom and, in the dark, grabbed his toothbrush and toothpaste as well. He thought for a moment more before going to the kitchen, where he also grabbed some food. He saw his grandmother's purse lying on the counter and grabbed the cash that was in her wallet. Ben hated himself more with everything he put into his bag. With a sigh, he put his backpack in his closet just in case he failed and someone found it. He soundlessly snuck over to his grandparents' bedroom down the hall and heard the quiet sounds of peaceful sleep. He couldn't let himself feel. Not now. He wiped the sweat from his eyes and put his hand on the hallway closet door. Creak. He stopped and listened to the deafening silence. Nothing. With another sigh, he swung the door open as fast as he could, which gave only a brief and quiet squeal of protest. Shit, he thought. I need help reaching the top shelf. He noticed a plastic tub on the floor, so he pulled it out just enough to grab a foothold and eased himself up. His feet rocked on the lid, and he hoped that he wouldn't... Crash! He heard a snort, followed by, "Honey, wake up!" In a panic, he climbed inside the tub and closed the closet just as the bedroom door opened, followed by the sounds of his grandfather's feet as he slunk past. Ben's head throbbed from where he'd hit the floor, but the empty tub was too cramped to move. It was hot in there, and his breath rang in his ears like the memory of a ghost, deformed by death. "I thought I heard Ben scream," he heard Helen whisper from the doorway. "Hold on," Charlie answered. "I'll grab the gun." Ben's heart jumped and thundered as he heard the closet door open. It didn't help that he thought he felt something crawl on his arm and tickle the hairs that stood on end. After a moment, the door was closed again, and he heard Charlie make his way into Ben's room. "Ben? Ben?" "Where is he, Charlie?" "I don't know. Ben?" "Do you see him?" Helen asked a few minutes later. Sweat trickled freely down Ben's temple. "No. Call the police." Helen raced to the kitchen where Ben heard her dial the phone. "Jesus Christ," Charlie whispered to himself. "God, Ben." "Yes," Helen said from the kitchen, loud and clear. "Somebody just broke into our house and kidnapped our grandson. No, we don't know where they went. We heard our grandson scream and what sounded like something break, and when we investigated, our grandson was gone." "Yes. Yes. No. Yes. Okay, thank you." "They coming?" Charlie croaked. "Yes, they'll be here in 10 minutes. Ben didn't hear them say another word, only their footsteps. His body was limp, and his eyes focused on nothing except the dark void in that plastic bin. He didn't think. He didn't feel. His mind was numb. Eventually, he heard the approach of tires, followed by voices. He knew that he only had moments to act, so he quickly scrambled out of the tub and escaped the closet. He leapt up, grabbed the string to the ceiling's attic door, and pulled down the ladder. Quickly, he climbed up and pulled the ladder back, gasping reflexively at the cacophony of noise it made. Mere seconds later, he heard the front door open as heavy boots stormed the house. Luckily, they never thought to check the attic. He stayed there the whole night, trying not to fall asleep and venture into that torture chamber with the nameless. It was the longest night he had experienced. The next morning, he heard his grandparents get ready to leave, and, with his head pressed against the floor, he gathered that his grandparents were headed to the police station for a few hours. This gave him some mild relief, as his stomach was on fire from hunger and his mouth was parched. They finally left at long last. Ben's impatience made his legs itch. He waited a few more minutes to be sure, and then went down the ladder. He made himself a large bowl of cereal that he couldn't finish and watched TV. He wasn't even really aware of what it played. His mind was far away. He could barely comprehend what he had become or planned to do anymore. But eventually, he heard tires approach the house early in the afternoon, so he quickly turned off the TV and raced up the ladder. He brought his empty bowl in case they noticed. Eventually, Ben dozed off to sleep, tired beyond belief. But for once, he had no dreams. Outside, the wind howled furiously, and Ben couldn't help but shudder. The air was frigid when he awoke, despite the heavy coat wrapped around his body. His eyes were bleary and his face felt bloated. He didn't have to remember where he was, nor what had transpired previously. It was as if somebody had paused a videotape and then pressed play again. Silently, he eased over to the ladder and pressed his ear against the floor. Nothing. Suppressing a cough, he eased the ladder down. It creaked slightly, but not so much that he thought it would wake them. Their bedroom door was closed, but not locked. He eased his timid body through. The warmth from the portable heater they'd placed in the corner brought flexibility to his muscles as he observed the two peaceful bodies. There was no sound save the blizzard outside and the warm click of the heater. Earlier, before he fell asleep, Ben heard his grandfather tell Helen that he would keep the gun in his nightstand, just in case the intruders returned. With apprehension, Ben carefully made his way over. The sounds of his boots were slow and coldly methodical. He felt like a disgusting creature of the night, but he had no time for such thoughts. He reached the nightstand and eased it open. The dry wood scraped against itself, but not so much as to wake the bodies. He looked inside. His eyes adjusted enough to the dark to make out the shape of his grandfather's revolver, with its polished cherry handle that glinted in the night. He wrapped his fingers around it and felt the familiar weight. He thought back to what his grandfather had taught him. No, he didn't need to think about that. He couldn't. He needed to be single-minded, devoid of emotion, devoid of humanity. Ben checked the chamber and raised the gun. The iron sight was pointed at his grandfather's oblivious face, peacefully unaware. This was it. This is what it all led up to. The moment Ben would become a pawn, a shell stripped of the very essence that made him who he was. He flicked off the safety. His finger on the hammer, the soft click resounded around the quiet room. Charlie opened his eyes. Chapter 9.
Ben?
His grandfather whispered. Charlie rubbed his eyes and motioned to lean up, but saw the gun and froze.
Ben, why do you have the gun?
He asked. The window panes clattered against the windows. Helen groaned next to him.
Charlie?
Nothing, Helen. Go back to sleep.
Did you say something about Ben?
No, just go back to sleep. Ben's hands shook, and his breath came in jagged gasps.
What did you say about a gun?
Nothing, Helen. You were dreaming. Ben swallowed, his feet heavy as lead, his eyes hot as a furnace. How could he possibly have agreed to do this? These two people single-handedly pulled him out of that dark abyss. They had done nothing but open their arms to him and show him the unconditional love he'd never experienced before. And it was wonderful. Helen rolled over and saw the scene. She didn't say a word, but only stared, eyes glazed in shock.
Ben, why do you have my gun?
Charlie asked again, more forcefully this time. Ben wanted to answer. He wanted to put the gun down, but his body wouldn't allow it. He could feel snot run down his face and silent tears try to pry free.
Ben, he made me,
Ben blurted, his mouth acting without permission.
What do you mean he made you?
The heater clicked loudly and hissed.
I'm sorry."
"Ben, you don't have to do this," Charlie said. His hand slowly crept to his chest.
"I don't want to. I don't want to,"
Ben gasped. "You don't have to, Ben. You can put the gun down and we can forget all about this." That was all Ben wanted to do, but he couldn't. His arms were completely unresponsive.
He made me,"
he choked. His chin quivered and snot trickled into his mouth. "Ben, just put the gun down."
I can't.
"Why not, Ben?"
My arms won't let me."
Ben blinked, and 2 tears rolled down his cheeks and fell to the floor. He looked in the window and saw the pale face of the Nameless leering through the frosted glass. He whimpered and started to hyperventilate. "Ben, just put the gun down."
I can't.
"Ben, just put the goddamn gun down and we can talk about the—" Bang! Blood and bits of brain and skull exploded back and splattered across the wall and all over the bed. Ben was vaguely aware of the sound of his grandmother's screams, her husband's brains on her face. But Ben couldn't think. He was locked. He could only react. But he couldn't. Could he do that again? He looked back to the window and saw that the Nameless was laughing. Ben began to lower the gun, but the Nameless pulled out the torture device from before and ran it up his own arm. No blood came out, and Ben didn't care to keep looking. He had no choice. Bang! The bullet pierced his grandmother's chest, and she rolled onto the floor in a fit of gurgled screams as blood filled her lungs. Ben slowly walked around the bed with the gun pointed at her.
"Ben,"
she blubbered. Her chest twitched.
"Why?" "I love you, Grandma."
She looked deep into his eyes. Bang! Her lifeless corpse slumped to the floor and leaned against the nightstand. The wind was screaming outside. The gun dropped to the floor. Ben didn't know how long he knelt there, staring at the hole in Helen's head. Her glazed eyes stared lifelessly at the ceiling. Her flesh turned cold. The panels of the windows clashed against the side of the house and snapped Ben out of his trance. He picked up the gun, turned the safety back on, and stuffed it into his jacket. He walked out the back door as if he were a corpse. There were 2 gas cans left in the shed. Without thinking, he grabbed them both and went inside. He didn't notice that he'd left the door open and snow had begun to pile in the house. Ben made his way into their room and doused the bodies in gasoline. He then poured the gas around the bedroom, followed by the rest of the house. He used every last drop. He grabbed his bag on his way out and stepped out the back door. He lit a match from the shed and threw it onto a small puddle he'd made in the doorway. The flames grew quickly, but he didn't care to watch. He wanted to leave as soon as he could. Ben didn't know how long he'd trudged through the raging snow, stumbling and slipping along the road, before he saw a pair of headlights approaching from behind. But he still needed to learn what he was doing. His plan only went this far, and desperate to get out of the cold, he turned around and flailed his arms on the right side of the road. After a moment, the headlights turned into a truck, and the passenger window rolled down to reveal a man in a cowboy hat.
"Come on, boy. You gonna freeze them ears off out here."
Ben thought he saw a second figure in the truck for a moment. Just a trick of the light. Eager to escape the cold, Ben clambered into the truck and put his bag by his feet. He made sure the gun was secure in his coat pocket.
"Mighty cold out to be walking along," the man said with a southern drawl. You lost or something?
Yes, sir, Ben gasped as he stuck his hands out to the vents.
Well, what's your name, kid?
Charlie, Ben said. It was the first name he thought of. Not a good one to go with. His stomach sank, but it was too late now. He had no choice but to stick with it.
Where are your parents, Charlie?
Ben scrambled around in his head, trying to think of an answer. I don't know, he said. I haven't seen them in a long time. The man shuffled in his seat and glanced in the rearview mirror as he grabbed a wad of dip.
You homeless?
He asked, with fingers in his mouth. The truck bounced up and down violently. I guess so, Ben replied. At this point, he tried to follow whatever the cowboy said.
I see. Well, my name's Teddy.
He stuck out his right hand, and Ben shook it tentatively.
Where are you headed?
Teddy asked. Ben shrugged his shoulders. Don't know.
Well, I'm visiting up from Texas for a few days, staying at a buddy's house. You can stay with us for the night until this blizzard passes through. Shoot, ain't this something, though? I ain't never seen anything like this. Hell, did you see that house back there? Thing was up in flames. Good thing somebody called 911 because the firefighters were already down there trying to put it out.
Yeah, I saw, Ben answered. He hadn't heard the sirens. He stared at the sea of white in front of them.
You from here?
Teddy asked. Yes, sir. Teddy nodded.
Yeah, I lived up here a few years a while back, but I got homesick, so went back home.
He pointed at a wooden crucifix that hung from the rear view.
See that there?
Yes, sir.
I was my old man's. He was a pastor down at our church, and so was his dad and his dad before him. But I never really cared much for preaching.
What do you do instead? Ben inquired, trying to keep his mind away from darker prospects.
Oh, I work with cattle, he sighed. I work for my cousin over at a slaughterhouse, but don't let that make you turn your head. We're kind as can be to those cows. I mostly run them through the dip. Oh, hey, I think this is the turn right here.
They turned right onto a gravelly path that went deeper into the woods. According to the clock, about 5 minutes passed before they arrived at a run-down-looking shack. Ben was observing the dilapidated building when he heard a faint click and felt something cold pressed against his head.
You say a goddamn word or try to run, and I'll blow your goddamn brains out, kid. You got it?
Teddy snarled in his ear. Ben still needed to answer.
I said, you got it?
Yes, sir, he gulped.
All right, he hissed. Now, unbuckle that seatbelt and climb out of the truck on my side. Slowly.
Ben nodded his head a fraction of an inch and did as he was told. Teddy climbed out of the truck and kept the pistol pointed at Ben as he grabbed a lantern from under the seat and lit it. Ben thought about using his own gun, but he knew there was no way he could outdraw him.
See?
Teddy said after Ben's feet hit the ground.
Wasn't too bad. Now get the hell inside, boy.
Ben shuffled his feet towards the door. Every warning about strangers who wanted to hurt him he'd heard as a kid fired off like alarms in his head. How could he have been so stupid? If he'd just kept moving, if he'd never tried to get the driver's attention.
Move it!
Ben hurried inside, painfully aware of the gun pointed at him. His feet tripped over some debris. Looking down, he saw trash and rubble covering the floor like moss.
All right,
Teddy leered as he closed the door behind them. For a second, Ben had an opportunity to shoot the man, but he missed it.
Now, take off your clothes, boy.
What?
I said take 'em off.
An owl was heard overhead as Ben began to take off his coat. Teddy jerked his head up for a moment, and Ben seized the opportunity. He grabbed the gun from his pocket and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. Teddy heard the click, and Ben realized that the safety was still on. He unclicked it, but right as he fired, Teddy did too. The side of Teddy's face exploded onto the wall, and Ben was knocked violently to the floor. At first, he wasn't even aware of the pain, but his chest erupted into agony. He became aware of something warm trickling down his chest. He stuck his hands under his shirt. The bullet had pierced Ben's lung. He pulled out his fingers to look at the blood and thought of his grandparents. And then Ben thought of Penny and wished that he could see her now. He wished she could be there to hold him, to tell him everything was all right. But he knew that the last time he would ever see her was when she had told him to call her before driving away. But he never did. He never would. His vision faded to black. Ben awoke in darkness. There was just enough light to see the silhouette of a figure behind the bars. "You're all mine now, Ben," the familiar voice said. He felt the cold metal around his wrists and ankles. He blinked, his single eye adjusting to the darkness. On the floor, beyond the bars, lay the dead bodies of Charlie and Helen Ross, their glassy eyes staring straight at him, just out of reach. Teddy's face came into view. "All mine." You've been listening to The Book of Agony, Part 2 by Dagan Billips. Dagan Billips is an author, musician, and filmmaker based out of Tennessee. You can find more of his work on the Creepypasta fandom website under username BannedInCP. Let me spell that for you. It's BANNED_IN_CP. Well, listeners, that horrifying ending closes out our evening. Thank you for joining us as we start Season 8 of Horror Hill. Be sure to tune in next week at the same time for another episode that'll be just dripping with grueling horror. Until then, stay spooky. If you enjoyed what you've heard on today's program, please take a moment to stop by our iTunes page or wherever else you listen to your favorite podcasts and leave us a 5-star review and a kind word. It makes a huge difference and would mean a lot to me. If you'd like to hear a premium, ad-free edition of tonight's and all of our other episodes, visit chillingtalesfordarknights.com and click the Patrons link in the menu at the top of the screen, where you can become a patron for as little as $5 per month and get access to our entire audio archive dating back to 2012, including past episodes of this program, all of our other shows, and hundreds of standalone releases, all of them ad-free and available to download or stream. Thanks so much for your time and for giving our sponsors a try today. When you support our sponsors, you help support this show, and that means a lot to me. If you happen to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, you can follow and subscribe to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights there, where you'll get all of our latest updates and new releases, and have the chance to interact with us each and every week. As for me personally, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, username Viking Guitar, and also on Instagram as Viking Guitar Productions. In particular, if you're looking for someone to provide voice work for your own project, or are in need of audio production of any sort, it would be wonderful to chat. Until next week, listener, when we meet up once again atop the Horror Hill for yet another dance with darkness, I bid you good night. Sleep tight, listener, and if you hear scratching at your door, don't open it. The darkness may have found you, but it's up to you to let it in. You've been listening to the Horror Hill Podcast, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcast Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com today to learn more about our network and our other amazing storytelling programs. Tonight's episode was hosted by, and its featured tale performed by, yours truly, Eric Peabody. Selected stories have been adapted with the kind permission of their respective authors. Original music provided by Nikki McSorley and Eric Peabody. Finalization by Craig Groshek and S.K. Brown. Got a terrifying tale of your own that you'd like performed? I take submissions. Email it to us today at submissions@simplyscarypodcast.com to have your work considered for future production. If you enjoyed what you heard on tonight's program and are joining us on your favorite podcast app, please subscribe to us to make sure you never miss an episode, and leave us a 5-star review and a kind word. Your feedback means a lot to me. You can also follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and yours truly on social media to connect anytime and get the latest updates on this and our other programs. If you're listening on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon as well to get more spooky tales from me and the crew, and another episode of this program each and every week. And don't forget to hit the thumbs up button to let us know how we're doing, and leave us a kind comment. Lastly, don't forget to visit us at chillingtalesfordarknights.com and consider supporting the team by becoming a patron. In addition to helping us out, you'll get exclusive access to our audio archives and ad-free downloads of all of your favorite stories, including those you've heard on this program. As for me, you can hear more of my work on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights podcast. However, I will be back next week with more terrifying tales to keep you up all night. If darkness is what you're after, listener, your search is over. Yet, let it be known, you haven't found the darkness. The darkness has found you.